السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته والحمد لله حمدا شاكرين والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. I hope and pray all of you are inshallah well during this current situation we find ourselves in lockdown, and during of course the pandemic of COVID-19. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of you, and may we use this this circumstance, this situation that we find ourselves in, and transform it really into an opportunity for ourselves and for the entirety of the world in which we live. May we emerge out of this as a better people, as a better human race. May we subhanahu wa ta'ala take lessons from things that we're witnessing, have witnessed, and inshallah perhaps will witness in the weeks and the months to come as well. Now, I must begin by apologizing for the delay in continuing this series on the Crusades called Unveiling the Crusades. We began, alhamdulillah, very well. We had some really good episodes. We looked closely at the context of Western Christendom prior to the launch of the Crusades. We looked closely at Catholicism, at the idea of Cluniac monasticism. We looked at the schism between the Catholics and the Byzantine Church. We looked at the role of Gregory VII in his conflict with the Emperor of Germany, and then his really student Urban II and Urban II's preaching campaign throughout Europe. We looked at the situation of Muslims and Christians in Al-Andalus in Spain. And we looked at the Iberian Crusades, before the launching of the official First Crusade. And we got a bit of a glimpse into what was happening at that time. And then, towards the end of our season, I think 3 and 4, we began to look closely at the Muslim world at that time and what was happening, with the Muslims of Bilad al-Sham, of Anatolia, of Central Asia, and the dynasties in power. We looked at the role of the Fatimid Shiites and the Sunnis as well, and then the launching of the First Crusade, the preparation for the Crusade, and then the march down from France to Constantinople and then to Jerusalem, the reasons for the Crusades, the propaganda against Islam and Muslims really at that time. We also spoke about the initial Muslim reactions and responses to the First Crusade. We went through the poems of Abu Muzaffar al-Abi Wardi Ibn al-Khayyat, the anonymous poet found in the text of At-Tighribirdi, and we looked at the jihad text of Sulami, Ali ibn Tahir al-Sulami, who died in 1105, and we spoke about the significance of that text in as a kind of very early response in trying to rally the Muslims to really fight back and repel the Crusaders and to recover the sanctity of Jerusalem. And I think that's kind of where we were. Then we had this delay and a gap, and things, of course, are all up in the air right now. But I apologize still, and I thought that rather than doing this on the Wednesday, I even felt myself it was too long of a delay to leave it for Wednesday. I thought let's try and cover, inshallah, as best as we can this weekend, and then perhaps, inshallah, on Wednesday we can start something, new in terms of the chronology, perhaps looking at the role of Nuruddin Zengi, rahimahullah. Now we kind of, we focused on the fact that before the Crusaders arrived into the Muslim world, before the Crusade was even launched in 1095, even before the launching of the Iberian Crusades in 1085 to 1089, in seeking to recover the territory of the Church of Tarragona or the city of Zaragoza from the Muslims. And of course, in these cases, the indulgence had been given to them, and this is why it was really the genesis of the Crusades had to be in the Iberian Peninsula, because of the fact that the indulgence was given, and this was the new thing that was being promoted to formulate the concept of the penitentia and the cluna, I mean, true forgiveness through that kind of temporal punishment of a sacrifice of a journey, taking the pilgrim staff and pilgrim purse. Although that happened only in Jerusalem, it didn't happen to It didn't happen with respect to Zaragoza or Tarragona. Saying that, however, we know that the Santiago de Compostela became a major site of pilgrimage, and I think even Urban II went there. He visited there in part of his preaching campaign. Therefore, the major centers of pilgrimage were the Santiago de Compostela in Jerusalem, Rome, and then, of course, the major one would be the Church of Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Um, so before this even happened, you had this situation in the Muslim world with the death of major Muslim rulers. So you had the death of Nizam al-Mulk, who had been ruling for 30 years, a major, Seljuk power, really, under Nizam al-Mulk, the wazir of the Seljuk Sultan. In 1092, he died, and then, of course, just shortly after that, there was the death of the Seljuk Sultan himself, Malik Shah. And then, within a few years, you had the death of Badr al-Jamali, who was the wazir of the Shia, Khalif. He was a wazir. He died. The Shiite Khalif, he also died. Al-Muqtadi. And then, after that, the Sunni Khalif, Al-Mustansir, he also died. And so within a few years, you had the death, called the year of the death of the Khalifs, or the year of the death of major Muslim rulers. And it made, of course, the incursion into the Muslim world so much more easier. I mean, just imagine had these very seasoned rulers and military generals been in power at that time, the story would perhaps have been different. But that's, of course, how history tells its story based upon events happening at that time, which influence other events, and that's just what we have. And so now, what this led to, therefore, was a really sense of instability in the Muslim world. The Seljuks, in fact, remember that one of we went through the letter, we went through the speech accounts of Urban II. Also, we went through, I think, 3 or 4 of them. We went through Robert of Reims, Gibi of Nogent, if I remember. And in almost all of them, he had this kind of appeal from Alexius Comnenus, the Byzantine emperor, to Urban II, Pope Urban II, appealing for help and assistance against the Seljuks, because they were making a lot of inroads into the Byzantine Empire. This was not a new thing; it was really an old story, because there's been a lot of conflict between the Byzantines and the Seljuks of Central Asia. The major one, of course, was the Battle of Manzikert in 1074. But they, of course, are making inroads, and they're growing as a power. But at the same time, they're not growing as strong as they could have grown, because of a few reasons. One was a growth in the power of the Shiite caliphate, in Cairo. That was growing. That was a power. That was a threat, in fact, to the Seljuk, power. A growing threat against them. It was a political challenge against them. And the other was that there was a division. There was a division in the Seljuk, in the Seljuk dynasty at that time, and this was precipitated by the death, or the killing. Really, it was a killing of Nizam al-Mulk, and then the death of Malik Shah, and this was precipitated by this event. It created a sense of discord and division. So what we're dealing with, therefore, is not only the fragmenting of the political order of the Muslim Sunni world at that time, but also other currents and trends that we're going to speak about today, in light of what Imam al-Ghazali at that time was trying to really speak about and address in his time. So whereas, therefore, when when Malik Shah died and Nizam Mulk died, he had 4 sons. Malik Shah, 4 sons, and there was a rivalry between the sons and the brother. So 4 sons, and then the brother, meaning the uncle of the sons, about who would be the next ruler of the Seljuk state. And it was then in 1118 that the 3rd son, Ahmed Sanjar, took power, declared himself to be the ruler of the Sultanate, and then his nephew contested that rule and goes to Baghdad and declares himself the Sultan himself that state, and then he was later deposed. But what you can clearly see, therefore, is that there's this rivalry, this political tension, political rivalry, and it's all about the seat. Everybody wants a bit of the, everyone wants a bit, a bit of the cake, a bit of the empire, and they're refusing to allow themselves, to think about the broader, idea of Muslim unity. About having a political vision that would seek to restore order in the Muslim world, in Bilad al-Sham, to repel the Crusaders, bring back the sanctity of Jerusalem. They weren't thinking about these things because it was just about power and dynastic expansion. And so, together with this political really turmoil in this time of the deaths, and then the power struggle between the Seljuks, this allowed, in fact, the growth of the Fatimids in Egypt, and of course in the Maghrib as well, to have more power and more base of power in that time. Now, saying this was not the only. It was not only political division, and that's the key thing for us to understand right now, because there were other factors, there were other divisions as well. Um, and this is something. Now, this is a context of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. This was his context, because he's in a time where he's born in Tus in modern day Iran, and he becomes very well known because of his learning, and he travels. He becomes student of Imam al-Juwayni, um, and he's really excelling in fiqh, in ulum, in different sciences, and usul al-fiqh, and and then he travels to Baghdad, and when he's Baghdad, he becomes appointed as the head, really, as the as the director, or the head of the Nizamiya school. Now, these were schools that were set up by Nizam al-Mulk himself. All the Nizamiya madrasas were really the madrasas of whom Nizam al-Mulk was the central patron. Now, al-Ghazali became the head of the Nizamiya school, and he's in Baghdad, and he's teaching everybody. But he has this sense of and this is happening, by the way, during the time when the not when the Crusades launched, but you could say that when the Iberian Crusades are kind of they're taking place. You had the situations with the Muslims of Al-Andalus, the loss of Toledo. Uh, you had the Muluk of Tawaif. You had the party kingdoms of Al-Andalus. So Al-Ghazali is kind of in that. That's the timing where he's really becoming popular, well known. He becomes very famous. He becomes very popular in Baghdad. Everybody is going to visit him and learning from him. But Al-Ghazali, interestingly, he has this transformation, and he describes in his book Ihya Ulumuddin the revival of the Islamic sciences, and we'll touch upon that, about the idea of how he conceptualized revival, particular to his time. Um, that in the same year, in fact, this is quite interesting as a kind of a situational irony, that in 1095, in the same year when the crusade was launched, Al-Ghazali, he has this spiritual transformation. So whereas he's very popular in the as a holding the lead position in the Nizamiya school, he has this spiritual transformation, and he begins to question himself. Well, what is the purpose of all of this learning? What is the purpose of what he kind of sees as a dry science of just teaching, and then gaining notoriety and fame and a reputation because of this learning and this teaching? And he felt as if there's something that's lacking and missing, which was the inner element, the inner element of spiritual purification, the inner element of ikhlas, of sincerity, of really seeking the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as opposed to being seen by people and wanting and thriving to be seen by people. And that's in the same year, in 1095. And so Al-Ghazali then leaves Baghdad, and then he travels to Damascus, travels to Jerusalem. He authors his Ihya Ulumuddin, magisterial text, really Ihya Ulumuddin, a voluminous text, and he authors that text. He's passing by a part of it. He also authors in the Masjid al-Aqsa, in close to the Bab al-Rahma, the gold, what's called the Golden Gate. There's a place there that he used to sit, and he used to author part of that book. Um, and what he's saying now, this is very interesting for us. Very interesting for us because um, what now remember that Al-Ghazali is not somebody who spoke about the Crusades. He didn't address. I mean, people criticized him for that. He didn't speak about the Crusades. He didn't write about the Crusades. Perhaps he would have known, of course, that Jerusalem has been taken by the Crusaders. It's likely he would have known these things, in his time. Although he died in 1111, so I mean that's a decade or so. He would have perhaps known about these things, but uh, what Al-Ghazali really sought to do was to put in place, a sense of revival in the Muslim world, because he believed that there's a root cause to that sense of division in the Muslim world. Why is there political turmoil in the Muslim world? Why is the Khalif really uninterested in the affairs of other parts of the world? Remember that the Khalif was just a symbol of power at that time. The major power was held by the Seljuks, both politically and by way of administration, sorry, and by way of military. Why the fighting? I mean, there was infighting. In 10, I think 1017 or 1011, there was a major riot in one of the madrasas of a man called Abu Sa'id al-Sarakhsi. And Abu Sa'id al-Sarakhsi, this was a contest between the Hanafis and the Hanbalis. So you didn't just have, rival political powers like the sons of Malik Shah and the uncle fighting against one another. We spoke about that, in fact, in terms of the siege of Jerusalem, that the sons of Malik Shah are contesting each other as the Crusaders are taking Jerusalem from the Muslims. It wasn't just a political disturbance, but it was also on religious lines. And so therefore, imagine riots between the Hanafis and the Hanbalis. And this was happened in the school, in the madrasa of Abu Sa'id al-Sarakhsi. And he himself was killed in that riot. He was, imagine, the man himself, the scholar himself, was killed in that riot. You had in the 1077, between the Hanbalis and the Ash'aris, another major fight, major public brawls. You would have these punch-ups between Hanafis and Hanbalis and Shafis, and it's really disturbing. You even had them in Baghdad, in fact, at the same time. And so Imam Ghazali is really witness to this. He's seeing this. Why would you, dispensers of learning and of knowledge, raise your hands against other Muslims because of differences that you have, with them on jurisprudential lines, or maybe even in theological lines? But why would you do that? And so Al-Ghazali, he believed that the root cause for this sense of dissension amongst the Muslims was the fact that they had taken it upon themselves to preoccupy themselves with the drier sciences of fiqh and of usul al-fiqh. And although this is extremely important, because this really is the essence of our religion, it should not be so at the at the lack of focusing on the inner obligation of seeking self purification, because that's like the fuel that's going to drive the engine. And Imam Ghazali felt that that had to be his focus. And so he questions himself. He has this, spiritual questioning himself about whether he's doing, what is it correct or not? Can he really prove himself that he's really a Muslim in that sense? Is he really seeking Allah, or is he just embroiled in the debates between the people of Kalam and the philosophers, and just debating and critiquing them? And although he produced some amazing works, in that line, it was about himself. And he even says in one of his in the Hiya, he says that I want to be guided, and then other people guided through me. I want to be the one who myself first is the one who finds this spiritual nourishment in Islam, and then other people be guided through me. And so therefore it became a personal journey. That's why he left Baghdad, and then he travels to Damascus, and then Jerusalem. And then he returns, by the way, to his homeland, and then he he really becomes what we call an ascetic, or a Sufi in that sense, what he was known as later on. Um, and his focus on the ilm of like suluk, or of tazkiyat to nafs, is extremely important, and that's really the focus of the Ihya Ulumuddin. But there are other things as well, and they had a kind of a political edge to them. So remember that Al Ghazali, we can't, we don't say, I mean, I don't, I have a section in my book about Al Ghazali, called the New Sunniism of the Seljuk period, and where I speak about the role of Al Ghazali. And whereas it's obvious he didn't speak about the Crusades, he didn't, write about the, like someone like a Sulami. Like, interestingly, that a Sulami, in his book Kitab al Jihad, he references Al Ghazali, right? So it's likely he's referencing Al Ghazali because he needs the name. He needs the scholar. He needs the name of the scholar, right? And so Al Ghazali, of course, was Shafi'i. As-Sulami was a Shafi'i, and he could use that, the name, the personality, the prestige of having someone like Al Ghazali referenced in his book. And so I think he's referenced either that, or Ash-Shafi'i himself is referenced. Maybe, yeah, sorry, my mistake. I think Ghazali is not in As-Sulami's text, if I remember. Um, maybe, I can't remember. It's been so many years. Maybe Ash-Shafi'i definitely is referenced in his text, but you gotta read the text again, see if Al-Ghazali is there or not. Um, but in any case, what's happening is that Al-Ghazali, in his political, view, his viewpoint, his methodology, was centered more on islah, more on rectification of the affairs of the ummah, rather than just kind of a political reaction to a circumstance, as in the taking of Jerusalem and setting up of the kingdom of Jerusalem. It was more about how do we fix up this. And so what he does, therefore, in the Ihya Ulumuddin, is that he praises, for example, the imams of the madhahib. He praises them, and he says wonderful things about them. Now, what this does, it kind of is like almost like a subtle attack against the ulama of his time, because what he does is he's saying, like, you guys, you think you're so great, but you're really hostile, and you're really intolerant, and there's fights, and there's both this takfir, there's this, casting others as disbelievers, there's physical fights, there's burning, there's also burning of, like, places of like, of homes and other things. This is happening between the Muslims, between the Hanafis, and between the Hanbalis, and between the Ash'aris, and, and the Hanbalis. And so what Al-Ghazali does is he says that the focus should be on learn about akhirah, learn about the next life, learn about what's happening in the next life, learn about things that would make you, beloved to Allah. How do you become beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Learn about dhikr of Allah, remembrance of Allah. Learn about things that would cleanse and purify the soul, because it would make you more mellow, it would make you more soft, it would make you more attentive towards Allah's anger if you do some things that would anger Allah. And he really made it a focus. And so what he does is by praising then the rulers of, sorry, by praising the imams of the madhahib, Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Malik, Abu Hanifa, by praising them, it was a way of showing that, they deserve praise, because they were, they carried a character of Islam in their time. It wasn't just that they were fuqaha, scholars of jurisprudence. They were scholars of the heart. There were scholars of like, of self-understanding. There were scholars of many fields, but their focus was always Allah. It wasn't focused like on myself, my own self-grandiosity, my own reputation. He really had a problem with this, about the idea that we're just all becoming, you know, leaders just for the purpose of reputation and power and fame and money. And he believed that that's doing away with the great essence and the great, the greatness of the religion. It should be, everything is being done, it should be done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, he has this spiritual transformation in 1095. He goes back, and then he becomes really concerned with these sciences. And then, of course, he gains a great following. Now, why this was so important is because it creates something. It creates a new aura, really. In particularly in Bilad al-Sham, it creates a new focus in learning, right? And so the later rulers that we speak of, like Nuruddin Zangi and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, they really took this to heart, and the jihad efforts therefore became became efforts that were based on spiritual renewal, right? You had the building of like Sufi khanqahs, you had the building of madaris. Even Salah ad-Din's father, Najmuddin Ayyub in Baalbek, he sets up a Sufi khanqah. You had the building of madrasas in Egypt when Salah ad-Din takes power in Egypt over the Fatimids. He builds many Shafi'i madrasas. Nur ad-Din does the same in all the internal states, Hama, Homs, Baalbek, Damascus. He builds these madrasas, and hospices as well. And the focus becomes really more of a spiritual one, not just one focused on what you might call the external sciences, but also one to do with the internal sciences that Imam Ghazali would speak about and write about. And so this is how Al-Ghazali is credited, because he he put into place something that became so effective in rallying the Muslims together, in ensuring a standard of spiritual excellence. So we'll see this a lot, inshallah. Perhaps on Wednesday, inshallah, we'll go again, inshallah, at it. The class on like Nur ad-Din Zengi's character, for example, was very much like this. The poet said about him, he's the Dhul Jihadain min aduwin wa nafs, fahuwa tul al-hayati fi hijai, that he was fighting two jihads, two wars, two struggles, one against himself and one against the enemy. And the poet said, therefore, his entirety of his life, he's in that struggle. And so that spiritual focus, therefore, was extremely, extremely important, for which Al-Ghazali and others are credited in creating this importance, and showing, therefore, that we have to have a bit of a balance, and our scholars should have that balance. And if you make that your focus, you will have less less of a willingness to make wars against people. He also saw the situation in the Muslim world, and he spoke about this in his book, Ihya Ulumuddin, that he saw the time that they were living in, like the way the Prophet spoke, and he told us that what's going to happen with this ummah. He said, he says, he says that a time is going to be where the nations of the world will gather against you, and will eat of you, will fight you as people eat of a meal, partake of a meal. And Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, will we be small in number on that day? He said, Bal antum yawma idin kathir, but you will be many, many on that day. وَلَكِنَّكُمْ غُثَاء كَغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ, but he said, you will be like frost on the sea, meaning just like, so irrelevant and so worthless and so useless. And he says that Allah would take fear out of the hearts of your enemies and put that fear into your hearts. And he says, and you will have wahan. And Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, what is that? What is wahan? And the Prophet said, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ, it is that you will love the world and you would hate death. And Imam al-Ghazali believed that what's happening in the Muslim world at that time was exactly this, that people were just so in love with the world and so in love with power and riches and fame, that they had forgotten the focus of you want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to prepare yourself to meet Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's really kind of where Al-Ghazali rahimahullah was. He died in 1111, and then what emerged thereafter, particularly with the capturing of the state of Edessa in 1144 by the father of Nur ad-Din Zengi, Imad ad-Din Zengi. Thereafter, it really became a great focus, particularly in the reigns of Nur ad-Din Zengi and then later Salah al-Ayyubi, that you would have intertwined, with the military effort, this focus on spiritual renewal, and these are important things that happened in that time. So now the other thing I said we would speak about, inshallah, today is a growth of attention to Fada'il al-Quds. And Fada'il al-Quds is extremely important. My PhD, in fact, was on Fada'il al-Quds. The book that was published a few years ago, my book here, The Cutting Edge of the Poet's Sword, Muslim Poetic Response to the Crusades. The first introductory sections of it are about the importance of Fada'il texts. But the entirety of my PhD, in fact, all more than half of it, is about looking at the importance of Fada'il al-Quds literature in the time of the Crusades and how they were used. Now, Fada'il means virtues or merits. And so what had happened, therefore, in the later part of the 12th century is that there was a growth of Fada'il al-Quds literature. Now, not all of them were new texts. In fact, few of them were. The majority of them were older texts that were brought back in by scholars, under the leadership of people like Nuruddin Zengi, to re-inspire the Muslims with this zeal and desire to recapture the city of Jerusalem. So the books of Fada'il are about the virtues of Jerusalem, are about the sanctities of space. And very early on, in Islam, you had from the first century onwards, you had the genre of Fada'il, meaning Fada'il of Quran, Fada'il of Sahaba, Fada'il of places like Mecca, Medina, Fada'il of of times of the year, Ramadan, for example, of places or people. This was a genre that was taking place, and some early texts of Fadail al-Quds, like by people like Ar-Ramli. Ar-Ramli is very early. Al-Wasiti, Abu Bakr al-Wasiti. That's an early text, of Fadail al-Quds. Fadail Bayt al-Muqaddas was al-Wasiti's. Fadail al-Quds, I think it was, of Ar-Ramli. Early texts. And then you had the whole focus on the virtues of Jerusalem contained within other texts, like, for example, in books of tafsir, like the tafsir of Muqatil is a good one because he has a lot of focus on the sanctity of Masjid al-Aqsa, of Bayt al-Maqdis, of the prophets who resided in Bayt al-Maqdis, right? There's a lot of focus there. Then you have Fada'il al-Quds as a focus in books of hadith, and we also think about the early narrating of such hadith as well. Fadail al-Quds is important in eschatology, in end time events. And so in the time of Nuruddin Zengi, the great scholar called Ibn Asakir, and Ibn Asakir was commissioned by Nuruddin to author a text on the history of Damascus. And remember that they wrote these texts like not just for Damascus. There was a one written on epistle or on the sanctity of like Alexandria, in Egypt or other areas. It was so that people, if they know why a place is sacred and important, they would protect it. They would die fighting for its protection or defense or liberation. But if you don't have that knowledge, then you wouldn't know why that place is important. And so when Nuruddin Zengi, therefore, is building these madrasas in and around Sham, he's really emphasizing the teaching of books of Fada'il al-Quds so that the new generation that's being raised, they know that Jerusalem is extremely important for us, even though it's being held now by the Crusaders. It needs to belong to the Muslims, and so therefore they would have this sense of yearning for that sanctity of Bayt al-Maqdis. Like so many hadith, Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, the hadith of Maymun, Aftina fi Bayt al-Maqdis, tell us something about Bayt al-Maqdis. What should we do it concerning it? What's this our responsibility towards Bayt al-Maqdis? And the Prophet says, Ituhu fasallu fihi, go there and pray in it. And if you're unable to, then fab'athu bi zaytin, then send oil to light the candles of the Masjid al-Aqsa, and you will have like the reward of praying there. There's so many narrations about the sanctities of that place. The Prophet said that as-salatu, that the prayer in Masjid al-Haram is equivalent to 100,000 prayers, and the salah in the Prophet's masjid is equivalent to 1,000 prayers, and the salah in Bayt al-Maqdis in Aqsa is equivalent to, in one narration, 500 prayers, in one narration 250 prayers. Therefore, it's a virtuous place. It's a place of settlement. Sahaba would go there, some would settle there. The Prophet said that, they mentioned the narration of Sulaiman, when he mentioned the Sulaiman Islam, that he says that لما فرغ سليمان بن داود بناء al-Maqdis, سأل الله ثلاث. When Sulaiman al-Islam, the son of Dawood al-Islam, completed building Bayt al-Maqdis, he asked Allah for three things. He asked Allah hukman يصادف حكمه. He asked Allah for a kingdom that he asked Allah for a ruling that would confer with Allah's ruling and decision. He asked Allah for hukman, a ruling لا ينبغي لأحد بعده, that would sorry, mulkan لا ينبغي لأحد بعده, a kingdom that would no one else would have. And he asked Allah, أن لا يأتي هذا المسجد أحد لا يريد إلا الصلاة فيه إلا خرج من ذنوبه كيوم ولدته أمه, and that nobody comes to this masjid except to praise salah in it, except his sins are removed like the day his mother gave birth to him. Subhanallah. I mean, such a magnificent hadith. And the Prophet says, أَمَّا اثْنَتَانِ فَقَدْ أُعْطِيهُمَا, as for the first two, Allah gave them to him. وَأَمَّا الثَّالِثَ وَأَرْجُو أَنْ يَكُونَ قَدْ أُعْطِيَ الثَّالِثَ وَكَمَا قَالَ, and I hope that the third one will be given, to us, to us. So therefore, it's immense. And Sahaba would travel, in fact, from Medina to Jerusalem on account of this hadith, and really not like bother themselves with other things en route, just so that they could be included as the people who went there only for the purpose of Salah in Masjid Al-Aqsa. Subhanallah. And so, of course, don't forget the verse in the Quran, the first verse of Surah Al-Isra. Allah in the Quran says, Subhanahu wa ta'ala, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. Allah in the Quran, he says that glory be to him who took his servant by night. This is the Isra and the Mi'raj. The Isra is from the travel from from Mecca to Jerusalem, Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa, and the Mi'raj would be the heavenly ascent from Jerusalem, from Al-Aqsa to the heavens. And Allah says, glory be to him who took his servant by night from Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa, whose precincts we have blessed. And Allah says, Allah is all hearing and Allah is all seeing. And so the verse therefore mentions Masjid al-Aqsa by name, known as the furthest masjid, and the sanctity of that place. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he says, radiallahu anhu, he says that there isn't an inch of land where a prophet hasn't prayed, nor an angel stood, or an angel prayed even. And so that's because the Prophet led all the prophets in prayer on the night of the Isra. He led all them in salah, Allahu Akbar. And so he says there isn't an inch of space where a prophet hasn't prayed. And so the sanctities of Al-Aqsa are so numerous. They're so numerous, subhanallah. That it's a place of Anbiya. It's a place of Zakaria alayhi salam, of Maryam alayhi salam, of Isa alayhi salam, of Ibrahim alayhi salam, of Ishaq alayhi salam, of Sarah alayhi. I mean, so much history and Islamic significance in Bayt al-Maqdis and around Bayt al-Maqdis. Subhanallah, it's immense, And so, the virtues of Bayt al-Maqdis were very key for Muslims to learn about them, to read about them, to author texts. You also had the text of Sam'ani. Sam'ani was this is 1150s, and so his was a new text, by the way, on the virtues of Bayt al-Maqdis, as was Ibn Asakir's Tarikh Dimashq. By the way, in Tarikh Dimashq, which is about 70 volumes history of Damascus, his first book, his first section, is on the virtues of Asham, and of course the cornerstone of Asham is going to be Bayt al-Maqdis, is going to be Jerusalem, and so he emphasizes a lot on that. I discussed that all in my PhD thesis, and so one of the most prevalent hadith, in his text and also in other texts, and that was used a lot in this time, was the hadith when the Prophet says that لا تزال طائفة من أمتي منصورين, that there will always remain a party of my ummah, a group of my ummah, victorious, ظاهرين, manifest upon the truth, على الحق, لا يضر من خذلهم, they will not be harmed by those who betrayed them, and they will remain like that until Qiyamah. And the Sahaba, they said, where are they, Ya Rasulullah? And there's different narrations here. One of them is that they're in Bayt al-Maqdis, in Jerusalem and what's around Jerusalem. And so these hadith were emphasized a lot, and in Damascus and around Damascus. And so these were emphasized a lot by the ulama in that time. to kind of really create this sense of yearning and inspiring the Muslims to recapture the city of Jerusalem. And so, therefore, the sanctity of Jerusalem was essential, and it was important for Muslims in the 12th century who had lost Jerusalem to think of ways of re-inspiring the Muslims to retake the city. And in the building of in the madrasa building program, in particularly in Bilad al-Sham and also in Egypt, this was a focus. And they authored these new texts. These texts became, they proliferated in that time, and they were public. They were like readings called sama'at, which were public, like listenings to the hadith. Sometimes they were held in mosques, sometimes in madrasas, sometimes in homes, sometimes in orchards outside. But oftentimes the books of Fada'il were important. In fact, just right towards the end, I think 1187, when the years of the Battle of Hittin and the recapture of Jerusalem, the text of Al-Wasiti, the old text, was recited in a public listening, public gathering. So therefore, these are things that are important to understand, how the Muslims are seeking to respond, to the occupation of Jerusalem. On the one hand, you had the great significance of that new Sunniism of that time with Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. You had and by the way, when this focus happened, the reason why it was important, because in his context, you had all these brawls and fights, and the Hanafis fighting the Hanbalis and the Asharis fighting the Hanbalis, and you had fires and you had punch-ups, and people would die even in these situations. And that really lessened, that really went down. When people began to focus more on cleansing themselves and spiritually and thinking about akhirah, with a lot of focus on akhirah, uh, those things really kind of dissipated a lot, after that time. And really, I think it's kind of a testament to the really clever thinking of the great scholar Al-Ghazali. By the way, Imam Suyuti believed, and others believed, that Al-Ghazali was the Mujaddid, of the 5th century Hijri. And I guess he's credited for that because of his newfound focus on bringing back into the fore something that was lost and needed to be there. And so may Allah, have mercy on his soul and reward him immensely, for that. And then, of course, we spoke about the significance of the text of Fada'il. Fada'il, of course, text merits of Jerusalem, merits of Sham, so many hadith about the virtues of Sham generally, and Jerusalem specifically. And these were taught, books were being produced in that time. Many old ones were brought back, like Al-Raba'i, Al-Wasiti, Al-Ramli, like I mentioned before. New one like Al-Sama'ani, use of hadith about, and chapters on Sham by Ibn Asakir in Tarikh Dimashq, and others as well. And so I hope, inshallah, we've learned something today to better understand and contextualize how things are happening at this time, when the Muslims have lost Jerusalem, but looking at some of the undercurrents to understand, what needed to take place in the Muslim world, particularly in the Levant, in the Bilad al-Sham, that really, made the recapture of Jerusalem more of a likelihood, And so I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to understand, to have an understanding and knowledge, and to think about the world in which we are living in right now, and how we can use these things and understand history, right, to its correct use. And so, again, may Allah keep everyone safe in this very difficult time. Stay at home, don't go outside, right? Stay at home, and look after yourselves, look after your families. Use the situation we're in as an opportunity for all of us, to have closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to increase in worship, to increase in His remembrance, to become better servants of His. Look after your families, create great times, for your families, and really grow. May Allah allow all of us to grow in Iman in this time. And Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.